Hello and welcome to Take from Caesar. I'm David Myrland. Nothing you'll hear me say is intended as legal advice. Anything that sounds like that to you, just consider it something somebody else might do on a planet far, far away where the law matters. It doesn't matter here. I prove it on a daily basis. Believe it. This is about the flash drive I've put together, full of great stuff, because I retire from providing legal services. And rather than sit on all I've done, for the first time, I'm going to make some very key materials available in Microsoft Word for those who are inclined to copy and paste, who want to assemble great-looking pleadings, especially about my very particular and unique analysis and treatise about the tax code. In 1988, basically April 15th of 1988, the IRS came to my doorstep, and there I was, the world's fastest bartender. I had a 2-car garage wood shop and an oak school chair that I made in my shop in 5 furniture stores. And I didn't like the way the IRS treated me, and I looked around and I said, I got this chair in 5 furniture stores. I'm the fastest bartender. I can do tax law. So 2 months later, June of '88, I started studying tax law. No prior instruction and no interference from anybody else. I was on my own, comparing what the IRS said it could do to me to what the tax code said the IRS could do to me. And I began with the premise that the public servants confronting me over 1984 income taxes, purportedly, you're a citizen of the United States. We all have to comply with the tax code. Okay, let's see what the law says you can do to me, servant breath. And I dove right into U.S. tax law. Again, no prior instruction. And I instantly became a fiend of tax law and Supreme Court cases. You can't read too much case law. And you'll see that the contents of this flash drive bear that out. I read tons of case law about statutory interpretation, constitutional rights, and limitations of government authority. And I did a bunch of things right, unbeknownst to me, but in retrospect, to be a fan of case law instead of a fan of other teachers, gurus, whatever, was a very wise move on my part. And I'd live in the law library for a week, chasing down particular topics and aspects of American jurisprudence and study up on the case law behind that, so that when I made writings to the IRS, I could speak on a higher level than just a pro se trainee that was trying to solve a particular tax problem. I wanted to make sure that the IRS was going to leave me alone. So I was very earnest in my studies. But one of the biggest aspects, most important things that I did in all of my research, especially early on, I read decisions where the government lost the case. That's how you learn your rights. When the courts have to explain what your rights are and tell the government that the government has lost a case, you'll learn a lot about your rights. And I learned from judges in these decisions. If you look at case law as an ocean of free law seminars directly from judges, you'll do a lot better with the, it's drudgery. When I read and I speak what I read, I do really well. But when I close my mouth and read, I don't read any faster. So reading was really difficult for me, but I stuck with it. And as you get into this flash drive, it'll come to you at some point that I did more work and I did it more responsibly than anybody else out there you can listen to about the tax code. Larry B. Kraft, the nation's preeminent expert on the history of income taxation in the United States. No question. Tax code contents in its current lexicon and provisions, I have that seat. There's nobody that did as much work as I did or responsibly as I worked. And in 1988, June, I started studying tax law, and 5.5 years later, January of 1994, I came out with a treatise called Codebreaker about the differences between IRS standard operating procedures and enforcement and the letter of the law, the tax code. Everywhere I looked, I found places where, they're doing things differently than this statute says or than this statute says. And I found regulations that twisted the law. So I was on a very solid footing because I had tons of Supreme Court cases and tax court cases that say this is how to interpret the tax code. This is how to interpret a tax statute. And I never deviated from that. I did my work along the lines prescribed by federal appellate decisions, Supreme Court decisions, and tax court decisions. Hundreds of them. Hundreds and hundreds of them. By 1995, I would say I had read over 1,500 cases, maybe 2,000 cases. You can't read too much case law. And this shows through in my writings, as it will in your writings. You'll begin to write better. Your sentence structure will improve. You'll be able to map out a series of paragraphs to describe one idea and conclusion that you sought to convey. So there's just a wealth of polish and basic abilities even that will come to you from a solid, steady diet of case law. And I didn't study case law about non-resident alien citizenship and federal jurisdiction. This is all about where the IRS says you're a citizen of the United States. Well, if that's the rule you have to go by, I'm going to go by that rule too. And I kept finding things that diminished, curtailed, or constrained the authority of the Internal Revenue Service, to where I simply had to write a treatise after a few years. I said, here's all the ways that I found that they're cheating us between constitutional deprivations in tax court and regulations that deviate from statute and statutes that the IRS simply ignores. They will not talk about a very certain particular list of provisions from which I can sculpt 5 or 6 arguments that just tear the arms right off of the IRS. Since 1993, when they first got these arguments from me, they've gone nowhere. They've rewritten a couple of the regulations that I attacked, and they simply ignore the rest of the regulations and statutes that I use in a list of 35 or 40 provisions for several key arguments. And this flash drive is about those findings and a bunch of other really neat stuff. And for the first time, I'm making my IRS briefings, my tax briefings, available in Microsoft Word. For those of you who want impeccably researched, immaculately written briefings of unique findings that to this day leave the IRS and the DOJ, Department of Justice, speechless. If you were to go to wevgov.com/Orth, Robert Orth's case, wevgov.com/O, small RTH, there's an exchange of briefs between me and the DOJ on the 7th Circuit from 2017 to show you that since 1988, right on up to 2017, what I did, what I've concluded, what I've described and briefed, it remains unassailable. The government just simply will not talk about the provisions relied upon when in fact they are controlling provisions, statutory definitions. Tax Code Section 83, that tax court, the federal appellate courts, and IRS publications all say explains how to tax the entire workforce. Section 83. I'm the only one that's written about it, ever. and the tax honesty movement heroes, gurus, Pete Hendrickson and David Champion, for example. They won't look at it. They aren't interested in it. They can't interpret it. Pete Hendrickson calls it gibberish. You don't have that option. It explains how to tax the workforce. You have to get into it. Or take the plaque down. Don't sell your books. Those people end people's livelihoods and terminate their liberty with prison sentences. That's not me. I'm at the other end of the scale. I work to keep people out of prison. So please, you only pay yourself a gross disservice by lumping me in with any movement or any group. What I do is unique to me, and I've been in court and been in court and been in court on paper, in brief, against the DOJ's best a bunch of times, and they simply can't talk about these particular conclusions. I drub the DOJ's best tax attorneys like salmon in a shallow stream. And I do so with very refined writing style and a lexicon fit for judges to read. So my flash drive, you see the folder right here on your screen. When you get the flash drive, this is where you'll begin. The flash drive will have one folder on it, and it's packed with the information about which I've spoken thus far. I open the folder, and let's start at the bottom, wevgov.com. Read everything there. In writing, you'll see my key tax findings. Tupotus.com is the homepage of a complaint that I sent to the president, and that would be President Trump when he took office, saying there's a whole class or category of convict that deserves clemency right away. TakeFromCaesar.us is built upon wevgov.com because in 2017, tax court called wevgov.com a tax protester website, so I froze it. And when you see all I argue is law, that's what a tax protester is. Someone that argues law the government can't refute. So I opened up TakeFromCaesar.us, and that's a load of fun. And then there's a link to my YouTube channel, Take From Caesar. Watch the first 15 videos, the 15 oldest videos on that YouTube channel to get a real good idea of the foundation in law that really permeates almost all of my activity thereafter. Then there's a link to a YouTube video where the president that preceded Trump says that you ought to teach kindergartners about sex. Okay, so we can ignore everything that individual has ever said or ever will say, period. Just above that, Michelle in Puerto Rico a few months before the 2008 election, telling a group in Puerto Rico under a white canvas tent, like a sunshield tent and banquet, that you're going to have to change your conversation, change your traditions, change your history, move to a different place as a nation. Hey, excuse me right there. To change our history, we have to lie to the children. And now what do? They lie to the children. You're going to have to change your culture. How? Sex and children and politics is one topic. Well, that's a big change in our culture, and you got to teach children about sex. And change your conversation. Oh, wrong pronoun. Oh, political correctness. Right and left everywhere you go. I live without television. You couldn't pay me to watch a television. And just above that is an MP3 file with those exact excerpts. You have to change your tradition. Pardon me, point of order. You're a political Chicago hack. Chicago is the epicenter of a mental retardation healthcare crisis. And you're going to give us our traditions? We have to abandon what we do? Like higher education, meritocracy, wholesomeness, conservatism? Be somebody instead of be somebody that shouts and throws bricks through windows downtown? And they say you got to change all this, and they don't offer you anything in return. Change that and do this instead. They don't do this instead. They just say, change that. And a couple months later, it'll be, change it a different way, because they were wrong the first time. And that half of the country is the Democrat. Then there's a picture of yours truly, davidmyrland.jpg. And now I'm going to go to the top of the list. Case law, I told you can't read too much of it. Here's too much of it. But you'll find that the cases that I give you in Microsoft Word, I've already been through these cases and highlighted in bold and italics the parts that I thought were most relevant for the reason I would save that case. These aren't all the cases I've read. These are the cases I've chosen to save. So they're along the lines of my teaching and along the lines of my learning, the things I thought I should keep a hold of. And when you go through these, understand that, let's take annotations.doc for instance. This document, annotations.doc, standing by. We're waiting for Bill Gates right now. Annotations.doc is a list of arguments that I put together. I copy and pasted into this as I wrote motions and pleadings for others, for clients. I would copy and paste their arguments into this document, which happens to be 263 pages. And look at how copy and pastable this is. I have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and I can copy and paste that annotation right into the pleading that I'm writing, where I wanted to argue that I have a right against self-incrimination. Once challenged, jurisdiction must be proven. I copy and paste it. It has a footnote. Look at that footnote that comes with your copy and paste. So as you scroll through this, it's an education in law to a degree, where I've put all these quotes and annotations with the case site right there, so that I personally, what you do is your business, but so that I personally could copy and paste it into another pleading if that's what I needed. So I could go to this document and do a search for a certain topic, come right to the topic, and bam, copy and paste it into the pleading that I was writing at the time. A judge with no oath. And this is page 8 of 263. The whole document is like this. It just goes on and on and on with copy and pastable arguments or annotations of particular ideas that I felt I should preserve by copying and pasting them into this document. And I would use it in other cases if I came across a need to argue particular points. This is just one document, annotations.doc. Not all of the documents you get on this flash drive are devoted to providing you with this accessory, but here's probable cause argued. Go look up recent case law about probable cause and enhance the briefing. This document is from my 2006 work. So it's an old compilation. You want to supplement it with new cases where you feel moved to do so. So I'm going to close annotations.doc. And that's an example. I just opened that folder and there it is. And this is another folder called annotations. And look at all these different topics. Annotated with case law inside. Trevant, that's the case in Florida that says, was it Jacksonville, Florida? That says, oh, he spent 17 minutes in prison or in jail, falsely arrested, so he gets X number $1,000. And the entire Patriot movement says, oh, that means if I'm falsely arrested for 30 days, I get $4 trillion. Don't use Trevant. It's an unrealistic parameter for determining how much you should be awarded for false imprisonment. There are a lot better examples out there, but for what it's worth, I saved the Trevant case. What is frivolous? Terry Smith Tyler versus Ross Perot, Jimmy Carter, Blue Mountain Cyanomed, NASA, a bunch of other government and corporate entities. And in there, FRD reported, that's Federal Rules Decisions. The judge says, the plaintiff is a cyborg, contends that she's a cyborg. She gets all of her information and inspiration from a spiritual guide she calls Proteus. And since she's so frivolous, I'm going to dismiss this lawsuit without giving her summons to bother these defendants that she's named. I'm going to take it upon myself to dismiss this as the court. I'm going to dismiss her lawsuit sua sponte. And then probable cause, original note. You have to have the original note to prove I owe you the money, Mr. Banker. Let's see. Anyway, you can go through these at your leisure with an aspirin handy. Zerbst annotation. Zerbst 1938. That's the standard or the benchmark for rights to counsel. BOP stands for Bill of Particulars. Going back to the main directory here in case law miscellaneous, you see I've got any property. There's 5 or 6 Supreme Court cases that say the term any means all of it, unless the law thereafter says, oh, there's an exception to the term any. So when you see the term any or any property, you have these 5 cases, Supreme Court cases in one document, that say it's all inclusive. They can't exclude any property from the use of the term any or any property unless the law provides for it. If the law, in fact, uses the term any. And that's key for the purposes of interpretation of Section 83 that explains how to tax the entire workforce. The definition of cost in Section 83 is the value of any money or property that you paid for your paycheck. Labor is property. Its value is its contract value. Section 83 does not allow you to include in gross income the contract value of your labor. And we aren't going to get into these arguments. This is about the contents of the flash drive. And so go through this at your leisure. Procreation prohibited is a case out of Wisconsin State Supreme Court. 3 women in the minority, 4 men in the majority. The women lost the decision. The majority decision was 4 men saying, oh yeah, we can prohibit this guy from conceiving children. And the 3 women, it's a funny dissent. You'll never see the majority and the dissenting opinion as far apart as you will in this case, and they'll explain to you why, as the majority of the court, they feel they can tell this criminal defendant that he can't conceive more children. So anyway, you go down this list of topics, and you'll find case law about those topics. I'm back to this directory. I click on data, the folder. Here's a bunch more authorities. Not so much case law, but reports. Here's the Federal Practice Manual. Pete Hendrickson, a book review written by me of his Cracking the Code. A case out of San Mateo County Superior Court where I got the judge to recuse herself in a very particularly pointed way. She couldn't wait to get away from the case, because I thumped her very hard with the fact that she falsely arrested a guy for contempt of court. Anyway, keep cruising. You can't read too much, okay? You can't read too much. And you get into this and you look at the things that piqued my interest over the course of many years. Many years. Traffic Explained under Montana law, 2001. So these documents go back a long way to present day. Now, I'll get out of that one. Let's move on. This was the second folder is about citizen's arrest. There's a common law right to arrest a felon with any necessary force. California has really screwed that up, but in a lot of states, it's still right there in the law. You can arrest a felon with any necessary force. Why wouldn't you want to know, therefore, whether or not a public servant had committed a felony? You're coming with me. Get your hands up against that wall, servant breath. You committed mail fraud against me. You knew you violated court rules, and so the case should have been dismissed, but you're still using the mail to send me notices of hearing, telling me I got to go to a hearing to where you can get my liberty and or my money. That's a conspiracy against my rights. That's a federal felony under 18 U.S.C. 241. I don't want to have to tell you again. Get your hands up against that wall. You have your rights. I have mine. What you make of that is your business. But I have all the case law in the world that says, yeah, you can arrest a felon. Civil litigation. Read through this. This is this Colorado folder, a great example of recent writing. I was paid to write this petition to go directly to the Colorado State Supreme Court as a court of original jurisdiction. It has a clause in its constitution that says you can do that if it's of great public importance. And so I wrote this petition for a nice lady in Colorado, and it's in Old Bookman font. I prefer Times New Roman, but this court specified that you'll do everything in Old Bookman font. But here's a 21-page briefing of unlawful bail, unconstitutional bail, and a judge with no oath. 3 attorneys in Colorado were waiting for me to finish this brief because they had clients that would likely sign on as similarly situated defendants or petitioners to this brief. And all 3 of those attorneys said, you know, there's nothing to add to this. Dave did a great job on this memorandum, and we've got nothing more to say about the topic. So things you got to know. Now, and we're waiting for Bill Gates again. The petition is wonderful. The briefing is very important, and there's even a table of authorities. All the names were changed, the docket numbers were changed. Mandatory judicial notices for municipal court. Put the judge on notice that these are certain parameters. Here's when a judge loses their immunity, and here's when the city can be sued instead of just the officer, so forth. And then a bunch more reading. Read all you can. Criminal intent seminar. I made this seminar. There's 3 different parts of it. Each one is zipped. You unzip each of those 3, and there's going to be an audio file in each one. You start the audio playing and then go back to the folder, and the audio narrates the contents of the folder. And then ebooks, a wonderful folder, a bunch of PDF documents of my writings. Take from Caesar Volume 1, take from Caesar Volume 2. The first one is a congressional criminal complaint of 33 pages, a racketeering complaint with a 58-page memorandum and exhibits, all told 180 pages, filed with 80 members of Congress, New Year's of '06. Supplemental briefing, filed with 3 committees in Congress to complement Volume 1, filed August 27th of 2014. And then here's my book, To the President, criminal complaint and request for a pardon for anybody who's only sold their labor and gotten a tax conviction. No confidence. It's a book of over 130 proposed statutes that I've written. I'd see a problem, I'd write a statute to cure it. West, final. This is Travis West, criminal complaint. They knew he was innocent in Kentucky, but brought him up on 7 charges of tax evasion under state law. And this is a criminal complaint I wrote for him against the Director of Revenue, the inspector for the director, and the prosecutor that knew he was innocent. And it's a complaint for conspiracy against rights with an attempted kidnapping. That's a capital offense under 18 U.S.C. 241. And they took him to trial without an attorney because they couldn't find an attorney that knew anything about the tax code. And he was found guilty, and so I filed a petition that you'll get in another folder in this course, or in this flash drive. I filed a petition for pardon with the governor in my name. I said, look what you're doing to this guy over here. You can pardon him. or otherwise you're part of the conspiracy, aren't you? You're committing a capital offense because you're now complicit in the conspiracy. They didn't pardon him, but they let him stay out of prison on a payment plan. That is every bit as rare as the pardon would have been. That's probably some of my finest work. Our Uncle, Our Problem, this folder, is a bunch of chapters that I wrote probably before 2002. And then Hybertson is a couple of lawsuits I wrote for Robert Hybertson that were filed in North Dakota, 2016, thereabouts. Gay lawsuits, a private business. Structure your business this way so that you don't have to cook and prepare gay wedding cakes. And it could translate to other types of businesses. You design your cakes to be overtly hetero, normal, natural, man-woman marriage cakes. And then you have your child copyright them. And then you license yourself with your child. I agree to make no other cakes in my bakery other than the ones that you design, because you have rights to your designs and they won't be mixed with anybody else's. And so this is Sharon's wedding cake shop. Sharon is my daughter. She designed these cakes. She's licensed them. She's copyrighted them. And I'm only authorized to make those cakes in this shop by license. It's an idea I had. I think that's about an 8-page little composition. Indictments, and I mean a bunch of them. Index verse .htm, that's a web page, an internet type file. And so I right click on it and I open it with an internet browser. This time it's Komodo Dragon. And that will pop up eventually. And let's do this. And here's a list of indictments, a whole bunch of them. Scroll through those, you'll find some tax protester indictments. You click on that folder, and there are just the indictments. Neat. IRS, we're going to get back to that. That's really the star of this presentation. January 6th indictments. You came into the Capitol and you raised hell on January 6th. I've been to college parties that were worse than that insurrection. Kurt Riggin, documents right off of his PC. He's got bodies of prosecutors all over Washington State here. He's beaten a bunch of prosecutors in Colorado. He moved there about 10 years ago. He's terminally ill from 3 or 4 things. His doctors can't understand why he didn't die 8 or 9 years ago, or how he could even lift a pen. Go through this at your own peril. The guy's a master. He's my mentor. And there are deep, deep holes that he's gone into and sorted everything out. Eviction, motor vehicle code, property rights, real estate rights. I don't know how much is on this flash drive of his, but it's right from his computer. Next, the topic of money. This one in particular, money precipice. Money precipice. The judge ran away from this document and vacated a misdemeanor conviction for solicitation of a prostitute rather than even talk about whether or not a municipality can accept Federal Reserve notes as a fine. The guy paid a fine to stay out of jail. $292, $392. Paid it in Federal Reserve notes, and I wrote this money precipice. That's a petition for a writ about an existing judgment. Did you involve me in all these crimes when you accepted Federal Reserve notes from me, Your Honor? Rather than even talk about it, the judge vacated the conviction without having even been asked to vacate it. Lending credit. When you apply for a mortgage, the Federal Reserve makes money out of thin air. They are not lending you money that's on hand. You are acting as a co-creator of money, not a borrower of money. I took a bunch of authorities that somebody gave me saying, this is what we argue to dismiss credit card debt. And I said, I'll write a brief for you. And I wrote a brief. It's their topic, their studies, but for what it's worth on somebody else's idea, This is the brief I wrote for him. Cruise through this at your own leisure. It's all about money and lending credit instead of lending money. Public vehicular travel. The Real ID Act of 2004-2005 says that when you apply for a driver's license, you have to provide a social security number unless you provide verification that you're ineligible for a social security account. That's what that affidavit does. Public vehicular travel memorandum, March 9th of 2006. Kurt Riggin and I co-complained in a racketeering complaint. This is in Word to the federal government that the motor vehicle code is being misenforced. They're applying it to public vehicular travelers instead of only to motor vehicle operators. We'll skip web for now. Zip file. This is wonderful. Bcraft. Those are freebies that I put in a folder that I gave his radio audience. He's interviewed me 3 times on his radio show about tax law. And what does he do to everybody else? He chops them to ribbons because they're wrong. And instead, on my YouTube channel, Take from Caesar, you'll find 3 radio interviews he did where I was invited onto his show. Hey, I'm too poor to pay this child support amount. Well, you're going to jail for it then, Citizen Breath. This is about that topic. You can't penalize the poor because they're poor. Evidence, money. These are Federal Reserve publications about how they create money out of thin air. Fujita, Washington State Law on Property Taxes. RCW 84.04.075 is the definition of person, and it doesn't list trust or individual, whereas a bunch of other definitions of person in Washington State law, they do list as one of the persons a trust or an individual. And so I'm not subject to property taxes because I'm an individual or I'm a trust. And we took this to the Ninth Circuit, couldn't get anywhere, even though we had the law on our side. And the clients opted to not petition the Supreme Court. Michael Idland, a Washington State patrolman who would camp out outside cocktail lounges and follow pretty ladies out onto the highway and pull them over in contrived drunk driving stops and manually sexually molest them and then take them back to the jail and do it again. And in these documents, you'll find an FBI affidavit that an interviewer examines 7 of his victims and recounts the testimony of those ladies in this affidavit. And Judge Palmer Robinson said, okay, time served, and let him plead out to custodial interference, a misdemeanor, instead of a felony, so he wouldn't have to register thereafter as a sex offender. And while in jail 18 months, he drew administrative pay. So you get the red carpet if you're a molester in Washington. Murdoch versus Pennsylvania. 1938, 1932, thereabouts. Murdoch versus Pennsylvania. You can't license the exercise of a right. You can't tax it. You can't penalize it. You can't criminalize it. And 89 cases since in the Supreme Court cite Murdoch for a myriad of reasons as to this is a constitutional right. You can't tax it. You can't make it a privilege. You can't criminalize it. ABC. And it's a total look. You get all 89 cases in 9 different Word documents. And I've gone through and bold and italicized the relevant parts that if you think you're exercising a right and they put a condition on it, wham, slam the door. Smallclaims.zip. 3 cases where a strategy I devised shut government down, stopped them in their tracks by using small claims court against them. School board and COVID. School board and sex in kindergartners. 1 course that deals with this. I wrote statutes to prohibit what they're doing to kids in school. Take the course. It's wonderful. A bunch of audio. I just made that course not too long ago at all. Back to the directory. And we're going back up the list to this web. These are websites. Treat them like websites. This is course number 1. See this? Click here first. Don't click anywhere else first. You click here first. I right click and I scroll down to my Internet Explorer, and here's the course. It's about gifting clubs. In 1999, 2000, 2001, they were prosecuted and sued by authorities across the United States. I got the only victory for gifting club members in the country by practicing law without a license for hay farmers and truck drivers in Oregon who were gifting club members. They filed a petition for declaratory judgment, and the state countersued them, and their advocate ran away. And I said, okay, I'll take the case for you. And in 8 months of litigation, I got 4 of those 5 plaintiffs dismissed in the lawsuit brought by the Oregon State Attorney General, Hardy Meyer. And here's a course about how in 33 states, gifting clubs didn't violate the pyramid scheme statute. Or in California, they called it the endless chain statute. And I analyzed 33 states' different statutes to show you in this course that, oh, you say I'm guilty? Well, let's look at the law to see if I'm guilty. And gifting clubs looked at the law in 33 states. So you get one project that was broadly conducted on one topic in 33 states, and I made a course out of it, called it course number 1 for a reason. Am I guilty, servant breath, or are you just trying to steal my money? Wonderful course. And then after you take the course, then you can cruise through these to see if there are more pages you ought to look at. Links. This is an old course. I wrote it in 2003. The links might very well not work, but at least you'll know where I linked to, and you can go to the home page of that organization or group and start your research there. Course number 2, offensive strategies. Where can I get remedy? A motion to vacate, a small claims lawsuit, a state court lawsuit, federal court lawsuit, appeals, motion for sanctions, an affidavit of prejudice. There's a bunch of different offensive modes out there depending on your particular controversy or dilemma. And this course examines offensive strategies. See how it's a list of folders? Look to here. Click here first. So it's the home page of the course, isn't it? You look for that HTML file first, and you open that first. And then you enter the course. And here's the course. Here are the different pages of the course. Vacate an existing judgment. Gold and silver argument. File organizer for when you start your case. I got these examples of pleadings. Different Word documents you can use. The basics. So I got these different pages of this same course. And then go through these pages for reading at your leisure. Washington Risk Address. That's the risk management office for Washington State. The bean counters. Hey, I'm going to sue the state. And these are the people you notify. So they've got 60 days before you can sue the state in state court. And it's 60 days, their opportunity to settle out of court to keep it out of the headlines. Course number 3, writing and filing citizens' criminal complaints. Click here first. Just like the other one, okay? Doesn't get any easier. I right-click, I scroll down, and I open it on a web browser. Here's my writing and filing citizens' criminal complaints course. In Microsoft Word, a bunch of examples of criminal complaints, state and fed, that I wrote for people. And then I took their names and personal information out of it, made it for Joe Lunchbucket. Course number 4 is the meanest I can be on paper. Click here first. And I go down to my web browser, Komodo. Retaliatory preparation for municipal tort suits. They falsely arrested me, so I'm going to sue them in federal district court. Here's how I would prepare in a retaliatory fashion to sue the municipality. You put the evidence, affidavits, a copy of the ticket, a copy of the police report, emergency room report, whatever, under an affidavit, and you swear to it. And that's the evidence for everything that happens thereafter. Then you put your state criminal complaint on top of it and file it in the appropriate places. Then you put the federal complaint on top of all of that, so the stack is growing, and you file that in the appropriate places. And then you put on top of that the risk management form that says, I'm going to sue the city, I'm going to sue the county, whatever. on top of that, so the stack keeps growing and growing. And then you go find an attorney. And by the time you find an attorney, everybody on the other side is getting ready to settle early with you because you got the goods on them in criminal complaints that threaten handcuffs for them. So I have this course about different cases over here where I use different portions of that same sequence. The Shasta County case, number 10, is where I got the idea. The entire Shasta County case is here, and there was a husband and wife on 10 counts each for conduct in the middle of their 42 acres in Redding, California, and it was for building an awning without a permit, building a drain field for your mobile home without a permit, building a porch for your mobile home without a permit, building an outbuilding without a permit, and then public nuisance. What the hell is public nuisance about the middle of my 42 acres? And so, plea agreement, please. And the prosecutor narrowed it down. I'll drop all the charges against the wife if the husband pleads guilty to public nuisance. The easiest of all the charges to attack. Yeah, we'll take that. And then he went on appeal. And the prosecutor got demoted to fish and game. Another junior prosecutor got fired. The judge retired 10 years early. And 2 members of the county board of supervisors resigned. One of whom he'd have been running against in the next election cycle had they not resigned. So cleaned up the county in one particular bogus misdemeanor case that they brought against this guy and his wife. And here's a bunch of other examples where I used portions of this strategy overall in certain cases where they didn't go all the way. Anyway, now here is... let's see, takefromcaesar.com, open this file first. This is my analysis of the healthcare bill. I wrote it in 2010, never marketed it. But in 4.5 hours, I pulled the gills right out of the healthcare bill. It's got audio. You click on the audio and come back to this page after you activate the audio instruction, and it'll take you right through this page. Healthcare bill analysis, same thing. I got audio. You listen to the audio and it'll take you through the contents of the page. Took me 4.5 hours to analyze the healthcare bill, and with my tax findings, I destroyed it. Half of it is an amendment to the Social Security Act. That's the half you can ignore because it doesn't apply to citizens of the United States like me. Income tax treatise. Here's a bunch of filing I did in 2009. Started with the exhibit, my 2006 complaint to Congress, and right on up the list, all the way to the President, the Confirmation Committee for Sonia Sotomayor, the Judge Advocate General for the Navy, Bruce E. McDonald. All this is 2009, and I took those findings and kept building on until the stack was 3 inches thick that went to the Sonia Sotomayor Confirmation Committee, Jeff Sessions. So I got busy, really busy with my tax work, and this 3-hour audio instruction will take you right through the contents of this page. Public Vehicular Travel Treatise, March 9th of 06, Kurt Riggin and I complained to the federal government, and a bunch of other neat stuff, especially key to the code. Very important tutorial. Click to run Adobe Flash, and Adobe Flash no longer works. So you have to open something that says this in Mozilla Firefox. That will still read Adobe. I'll get out of that. Jurisinformatics.com, index. Watch, I'll open it in Mozilla Firefox. It's a website that I used to operate, jurisinformatics.com, and you see it opens without this, and it says, hey, we can't do Adobe Flash. Yes, we can. I click on Allow right now, and it's going to allow it. Watch this. And a player opens up here with stop, play, pause, fast forward, fast reverse, volume control, and you can scroll through the presentation right there as you look at this page. And it'll be the same thing on other pages where you'll get the audio player if you open it in Mozilla Firefox. I'm not going to go through that and try to convert all those files to MP3. You're on your own. And CD to Congress. Click here first. This went to Congress. The CD-ROM full of folders and documents, so they know all about it. I agree. And enter. Come on, you can do it. There we go. And it's a course about my tax findings, 2006-ish. Now, here's the goodie. This is incredible. The last folder for review, IRS APA, Administrative Procedures Act. Aguinaldo, a case in Honolulu. She was harassed for 17 years by the IRS. You didn't collect FICA from your employees, and they harassed her for 17 years, and last spring, her husband died from this harassment, 17 years worth. And this is a motion I wrote explaining how it doesn't apply to her. She's a citizen of the U.S. She immigrated over here. Don't call her that citizen in Social Security chapters. It's not her. And I'm going to speed through this. Robert Orth, 7th Circuit and Tax Court. And this is the exchange of briefs between him and the government. You see his appellate brief, the table of authorities, his tax court petition, and the government's reply brief on appeal, and then his reply to that, the exchange of briefs. And you'll see that they can't talk about these provisions that he argues in his appellate brief. You can see the text of those provisions in his table of authorities. Steel Billy. Hey Dave, I got sued for real estate. They want to turn IRS assessments into real estate and take that real estate from me. Well, I lost it to my wife several years ago in a divorce, so I got nothing to lose. And I said, it's hell to see somebody get sued and just have to sit there. You want to go on the offense? He says, oh yeah. So he filed a counterclaim. All he sued for was for an explanation. They say you can have a clear explanation of the laws. And so cause of action number 1, I want an explanation of every tax regulation and every tax statute. Second cause of action, okay, forget that. I just want an explanation of my 30 provisions, regulations, and statutes. And if you can't do that, cause of action number 3, invalidate the assessments. You can't even prove the law operates when I have a right to know the explanation of the laws. And his counterclaim was denied. You can't have an explanation of the laws. And that was 2017. So, lighten them up. Eugene Warner, 2008, criminal case, Anchorage, Alaska. There's the back and forth between me and the government, resulting in a complaint to Senior Ninth Circuit Judge Browning. So you can get all the pleadings in these 2 files and see everywhere we went on pleading paper and filed these as exhibits in the Ninth Circuit to complain about the trial judge. Now, Richard Boggs, found guilty of 7 counts of tax evasion by the jury in probably November of 22. And these are, his attorneys went to sleep 3 or 4 months before trial and treated it like everybody else's tax trial, when in fact Richard Boggs had been a plaintiff in 9 different lawsuits. 5 of those are lawsuits he wrote and filed himself based on the ones that I had written first. And he took 3 of those all the way to the Supreme Court, got no answers anywhere. He was stonewalled, but he did his best to prove, I believe I'm not named in anything other than statute if I'm a citizen of the United States. Section 83 says all property is a cost, and a couple of other arguments, and took him to court, signed on as co-plaintiffs in Robert Hybertson's lawsuits that I wrote for him in North Dakota. So Richard Boggs was all over the place. And his attorneys were able to get him convicted of 7 counts by the jury. And so he said, okay, BS. And he started filing his own paperwork that I wrote for him. He did successive affidavits let's see, third affidavit, first affidavit, fourth, second, and third affidavits with their exhibits saying, you're violating the law in these ways. It's a felony, a conspiracy against my rights with an attempted kidnapping, and the judge is guilty too. It's a capital offense, and I want them all prosecuted. And then the second offer of proof. Here's more exhibits and more allegations of criminal misconduct because you know I'm innocent. I've been everywhere with this, and you keep the law a secret. And you got 10 days to answer. And they defaulted on the first affidavit, second one, the third one, the fourth one. And so he filed all 4 affidavits as exhibits behind his first offer of proof, saying, here's proof that I'm innocent. They won't even explain the law to me. So it violates due process to hold me liable for anything under the tax code. Second offer of proof. Here's my 9 lawsuits. Every one was a notarized civil complaint attached as exhibits. Third offer of proof, 5K2 rules. I'm innocent, you know it, I am. So under Rule 5K2, point 10, I think, point 7 maybe, I can't remember. You ought to reduce my sentence if you're going to take me to sentencing on these guilty verdicts. And then the fourth offer of proof was about a very important doctrine. Entrapment by estoppel. Very important. Lamar Hardy in Hawaii called it the reliance defense. Entrapment by estoppel. This is the most important thing in this flash drive, folks. Talmadge, U.S. versus Talmadge, 9th Circuit, 1987. Talmadge was a state felon. And then for some reason they found that the imposition of a felony charge for that offense violated due process, so it was reduced to a misdemeanor. A bunch of people, I think, got the reduction. And so his trial judge said, okay, but don't buy a concealable weapon. And his attorney said, well, based on that, yeah, I think you could buy a rifle. And based on that, a federal firearms licensee said, I think you can buy a rifle. And so he bought a rifle, and they charged him. And he took it to the 9th Circuit Court, and they said it violates due process. That conviction's got to go because he had the advice of a licensed firearms dealer, the advice of his attorney, and a comment from his trial judge. Just those 3 things. Richard Boggs cites a couple hundred appellate cases, a whole bunch of Supreme Court cases, so he's relying on advice from hundreds of federal appellate judges, innumerable Supreme Court justices, for his conclusions about law that the government can't deny or refute. And so to charge him, to convict him, is entrapment by estoppel. That's the name of the doctrine. It always has been. It's not the reliance defense. It's entrapment by estoppel. That's the most important document on this flash drive because everybody tries to use part of the law, at least, to argue, hey, I'm a non-resident alien. Hey, I got sovereign immunity because I live on the rings of Saturn. I'm in the movement. Or whatever. If you're relying on law, hello. So here's my motion about it. All the motions that I wrote for the Boggs case, and then had a falling out with a client because he wouldn't take my advice, and all of his contrivances just stood in the way of the strategy I have to follow if I'm going to write his appeal, if I'm going to write his request for clemency. If he's not dismissed, he's going to get 5 years. But he didn't feel that he needed me. And look at all these pleadings that I wrote for him and picture somebody saying, no, we don't need Dave. I'm a novice and I can handle it. When I'm just clubbing, like I said, I'm clubbing the DOJ like salmon in a shallow stream in his case. It really is something else. To have to suffer interference by the client who's messing around with somebody that comes through the back door of my law office and says, do it a different way. Well, what if that screws with what I have to do for the guy down the road if his conviction stands? So he had filed a letter with the DOJ saying, I want to appear before the grand jury. What do you say? And here's the second half of the letter is to the grand jury. And here's a follow-up letter And they said, okay, come on in and testify to the grand jury. He gets there that day, and they say, get out of here, go on home, you're not going to testify. And that's because they finally read the second half of the letter and said, no, he's not going to talk to the grand jury, or we'll never get the indictment. They had to lie to the grand jury to get the indictment. And you get all the pleadings that I wrote for his case, for as far as it went. And now, because somebody fooled around with what I was doing, and he thought that they should fool around with what I was doing, I'm out of here, and we don't associate, so I won't be around to write your motion for downward departure of in sentencing. I won't be around to write the replies to the government's opposition to these motions. I won't be around to write your allocution statement. I won't be around to write your appeal, and I won't be around to write your request for clemency while you sit in prison on a likely 60-month sentence to try to manage your case from prison. And that's what it cost this guy to have somebody walk into my back office and say, let's do it different than what Dave says. When I'm the one that's going to have to write his appeal, you're going to throw that much of your future to the wind? Far be it for me to give a damn and spend another calorie trying to protect your liberty when you don't care about it. So we had a falling out, but for what it's worth, all of my participation in his case is in the Richard Boggs folder. We're at the end of this flash drive expose. Actually, I'm not going to take you through these folders. Key to the code is fascinating. What would a key to the code look like? It'll look like this. Don't forget it. That's what the key to the code looks like. All of my arguments explained with statute and regulation only. This is my treatise in a graph. Okay? Have fun with that one. And Lloyd Smith, I didn't even get to Lloyd Smith. In 1980s, the IRS said Lloyd Smith is the most dangerous man in the United States. On the Washington State Olympic Peninsula, he had 7 shingle mills and refused to deduct from employees' paychecks. And the DOJ took him to court and took him to court and took him to court, and he beat the hell out of him every time. And here's an audio recording, an hour and 45 minutes long, from April 7th of 2018, when I took a trip to the peninsula to meet the guy, and I interviewed him. And he said that the Congress that enacted the 1939 tax code was not complete. There was not a quorum present. And then after Christmas vacation, all of the other congressmen came back to Congress, and they repealed the 1939 tax code. Then the 1954 tax code was enacted as an amendment to the 1939 tax code. It's an amendment to a repealed code. This is Lloyd Smith's hard drive. I haven't been into it yet. I don't know what you're going to find in it, but he would have a photographic memory. He was a scholar of the law, David Myrland times 10, and he could remember, his brain could recall photographs of the pages he had read. Totally different memory than my abilities, which are encyclopedic. His were photographic. Have fun in this hard drive of his. Bless his heart, rest his soul. He died a couple years ago of diabetes. Non-resident alien. Don't plead non-resident alien. This is the reason. And Travis West, Microsoft Word. He was taken to trial without an attorney because they couldn't find any attorneys that knew anything about tax law in Kentucky. And so here's the criminal complaint I wrote for kidnapping and conspiracy against rights. And they took him to trial anyway. And here's the pardon request that I wrote to the governor on his behalf, not for him to sign and file. I wrote it to the governor. I spoke as an advocate that knew about the case, and he was allowed to stay out of prison on a payment plan. Unheard of. One of the most colorful feathers in my cap, believe it. Definitions of innocence. All the reasons they shouldn't take somebody to trial. And here's the Talmadge case, 9th Circuit, 1987. Entrapment by estoppel. Definitions of innocence. And here's a trial memorandum from 2014, Anchorage, Alaska, from the government, where the government tells you in its own trial brief who is innocent and who's not when it's a tax case. Very important to know. Various chapters, those are old chapters I wrote. And that about covers it. This memorandum is the 58-pager from my New Year's of 06 filing with 80 members of Congress. Take from Caesar Volume 1. Here's my memorandum in Microsoft Word. I met a guy that calls this his second Bible. An Internal Revenue Ruling 2007-19, Section 83 provides for the determination of what is gross income when an independent contractor or employee sells their labor. And last, and certainly not least, L.T. Oates in 2019 tells me, David's joinder, he joined my congressional criminal complaint so he could serve it on the government. My complaint became his. David's joinder saved me from an IRS criminal investigation and federal indictment 8 years ago. It also stopped all wage garnishments and bank account seizures. Further, it stopped the South Carolina Department of Revenue from trying to collect $37,000 from me, and they haven't contacted me since. That was 8 years ago. Thank you very much, Dave. Hey, thank you, LT. My pleasure. It's why I'm in this business. It certainly wasn't for the money. If I was in this for the money, I'd have straight teeth by now. LASIK eye surgery. I'd be making money, but I stuck with it in the pursuit of justice. In 1988, I abandoned the pursuit of happiness and branched out into the pursuit of justice. And this hard drive, this flash drive, is what I thought I ought to offer people as my retirement offering, in hopes that somebody's going to pick up the ball and dribble it. I've done tons of work. Here it is in Microsoft Word. I got a YouTube channel. Here's the link to it right there. That's spectacular. Watch at least the oldest 15 videos on that channel to get an idea of how far I've gone, the statutory basis for everything I do, how much I rely on case law, so I get advice directly from judges for what I propose other people do with their right to redress. My name is David Myrland. None of this is legal advice, believe it. And just stay out from between their wheels, folks. The government means business, and if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you're doing when you mess with government. Take care, everybody. Stay innocent.